Hi, welcome back to All About the Sound. We're going to continue learning about the English language using the 3P approach by discussing something called stress and schwa. Stress and schwa. And yeah, those are tongue twisters. Hard to say those words together quite frequently. But stress and schwa are a way that English keeps its rhythm. English, like German language, and unlike the French and Spanish languages, tends to be stress timed, meaning that every bit of time within the English language, we're going to hear a stress or a sound emphasized, or a collection of sounds, as in a syllable, emphasized and stressed, followed by less stress. So we're going to hear this up and down motion, this intonation and inflection, as it's often called. English is a stress time language rather than a syllable time language, but stress is all about the sounds each syllable makes. We are talking about multi-syllable words, words with more than one syllable, when we talk about stress and schwa. Some of those syllables again are word parts containing a vowel sound, will be more emphasized and heard more clearly than other syllables will. And this is what gives English its rhythm and flow. So let's continue with stress and schwa using the 3P approach to help us understand the English language better. If I were to talk like this through many multi-syllable words without giving one syllable more expression, more stress than another, it would get very hard to listen to me after a while. English is known for its rhythmic nature. We stress certain syllables so that we can hear and listen and speak in a way that flows rhythmically. Otherwise, we would have something called monotone speech. If all syllables in a word were spoken with the same amount of emphasis, inflection, and intensity, speaking and listening to English passages would be very monotone and, frankly, very boring. Identifying and hearing the phonemes in multi-syllable words, and I can't stress enough that when we talk about stress and schwa, we're talking about words that have more than one syllables. Words in English that have more than one syllables are called multi-syllable words. Hearing the phonemes in these multi-syllable words can be challenging even when we chunk them into specific syllables or word parts. It gets even tougher when we want to pronounce a word in a way another can understand. We need to know where to put our emphasis, so we give English not only the rhythm that it is known for, but the meaning and understandability that we need to express to another speaker or another listener. We want to avoid that monotone speech, so that is why we have stress and schwa in the English. So of those two, stress and schwa, we're going to look at stress first. And stress, we want to know, is where do we put the emphasis? What syllable in a multi-syllable English word are we going to emphasize more than the others? To ensure that both the sound of the word and the meaning have the impact intended, we use stress. We need to stress certain syllables in a multi-syllable word so those syllables have the impact needed to change the way the word flows out of our mouth and into our ears. So the first part, or part one of this section on stress and schwa, will be emphasizing primary stress. That syllable that will take the most emphasis from a multi-syllable word. Let's go on. Say what, crazy lady? What are stress syllables? Stress syllables are louder, longer, higher pitched, and pronounced more fully than other syllables in a word. Again, we are dealing with multi-syllable words, words that have more than one syllable, more than one vowel sound. And each word part that contains a vowel sound, remember, is a syllable. In English, which is considered a stressed language in the sense that we are stressing certain syllables in a multi-syllable word to create emphasis and a variety of ups and downs in our language to avoid it, or to prevent it, from becoming monotone. So a stressed syllable in a multi-syllable English word is louder, longer, higher pitched, and pronounced fully. Stressed syllables in a multi-syllable English word also require different movements of speech muscles. So we're going to see when the word has a stressed syllable in it, that stressed syllable is going to require the speaker to have a larger movement of the mouth, the jaw, and the lips. So if you're watching an English speaker speaking, you'll be able to tell which words or which word parts or syllables are stressed, because the mouth will become wider, there'll be more jaw movement and more obvious lip movement when the syllable is stressed. So remember, we are dealing with multi-syllable words, English words that have more than one syllable. A syllable is a word part that contains a vowel sound. So a multi-syllable word will contain more than one vowel-containing part or syllable. Now, the more syllables we have in a word, the more likely we're going to have more than one stress. Okay? So, if the word contains many syllables, we are more likely to have at least two stressed syllables in that word. Multi-syllable words can have more than one stressed syllable. They can have a primary stressed syllable, which would be where the most of the stress is on, and they can also have another syllable that is stressed, and we call that the secondary stressed syllable. So they can have a primary stress and a secondary stress if we have many syllables in an English word. So for this presentation, we are dealing with the syllable that is primarily stressed, the primary stress syllable, that part of the word that takes the most stress or emphasis. It is the syllable in the multi-syllable word that is the loudest, longest, and most higher pitched. It is the syllable that is pronounced the most fully or clearly, and it is marked in a phonetic notation, that notation found in a dictionary after the word and before the actual definition, that allows you to sound out the word by giving you the phonetic symbols necessary, not the graphemes, but the phonetic symbols that represent the phonemes being used in that word. In the phonetic notation, you will find the primary stressed syllable marked with a little vertical line at the top and before that syllable. So we'll be looking at that as we go on. So let's look at two words and try to identify the symbol in the phonetic notation that will tell you which syllable in a multisyllable word is being stressed. So let's look at this one. Of course, this is not the graphemes. This is not the spelling of the word. This is the phonetic notation representing the phonemes that are being used. We see congratulate, congratulate, congratulate. 4 syllables. Can you tell which syllable is being stressed primarily? And if you said this one here, you are absolutely right. We mark by the little line at the beginning of the second syllable. Gratch, gratch, congratulate. That is the syllable that is louder, longer, higher pitched, and more fully pronounced. It is also the syllable that requires different movements of the mouth. Congratulate, congratulate. You see more movement of the lips, jaw, and tongue when I say congratulate. The second syllable is primary. Let's look at this word, maternity, maternity, maternity. 4 syllables again. Which one is being stressed primarily? And if you said the second syllable, you are absolutely right. That little line there marks it's a sign that marks the primary stress in your phonetic notation. Maternity. Watch my lips. Maternity. My lips are moving more. My jaw is moving more than the other syllables are. The mater requires louder, longer, and more fully pronounced or clearly pronounced syllable. Let's move on. So let's look at secondary stress. We had our primary stress, that word part with the vowel sound in it, or the syllable as it's also called, that has the most emphasis in a multi-syllable word, a word that has more than one syllable. What syllable takes most of the stress? Is the primary, right? The primary stress. The secondary stress is placed on a syllable that takes a weaker but still a bit of stress for the word. So let's look at that. Let's think of primary stress as the lead singer in that multi-syllable word. It is the sound we're going to hear the most, right? It's going to be louder, it's going to be longer, it's going to be higher pitched, it's going to be most clearly enunciated or pronounced. Secondary stress, on the other hand, is the background singer that is behind the lead singer, helping to create that rhythm that English is known for. It's also helping to create a harmony and support for that primary stress syllable. Secondary stress, however, is not as strong as primary stress. That's why it is called secondary stress. And again, these stresses are found only in multisyllable words, and when we get a secondary stress, it's usually a longer multisyllable word with more than 3 syllables. Now, whereas the primary stress is marked with a vertical line in front of the syllable that is being stressed in the phonetic notation, at the top, the secondary stress will be found on that syllable that's taken the secondary stress at the beginning, but on the bottom. So you see this word? Do you understand? Understand? Right. The primary is stand in understand, but the secondary stress is placed on the first syllable, under. So you will see that it is in the beginning of that syllable. I should say it was the third syllable. These syllables are not broken down, but understand has 3 syllables. Un, der, and stand. So in multisyllable words, we will have one syllable taking the stress, and that is called our primary stressed syllable. In larger multisyllable words, we may have another syllable taking the secondary stress, a weaker form that helps support the primary stress syllable and helps to continue with that rhythm and harmony the word requires. But how do we know what syllables to stress? There are many rules to help us. But English, as we know, has just as many rule breakers as it does rules. So we will refer to these rules that help us to know where to place our stress as the not so reliable stress rules. The not so reliable because sometimes the rules just don't fit. And again, these rules often depend on how many syllables are in a word. How many syllables are in a word? So again, we're dealing with multi-syllable words, words with more than one syllable, and a syllable is a vowel-containing word part. So in the smaller multi-syllable words, we're going to look at those first, and those are our 2-syllable words. We only have 2 syllables, 2 vowel-containing word parts in that word. So let's look at 2-syllable words and the not so reliable stress rules that apply to 2-syllable words. If a 2-syllable word is a noun or an adjective, the first syllable is stressed. If a 2-syllable word is a noun or adjective, the first syllable is stressed. We need to remember that a noun is a person, and it could be like a proper name for a person, like Albert Einstein, my guy. A thing, like a book. A place, like Canada. A quality, like intelligence or kindness. An idea, say, for example, universal peace, something we're striving for, especially these days. Or an action, as in the dancing. Dancing itself is a verb, but the dancing, when I'm referring to it that way, is a noun. An adjective, on the other hand, in English, is a word that describes a noun, like the pretty cat, or the lazy sun, or the classic book. The pretty is describing cat, the lazy part is describing sun, and classic is describing book. Those are adjectives. So rule number 1 in our not so reliable stress rules, stress the first syllable in a 2-syllable noun or adjective. Okay? If the word is a noun or an adjective and it contains 2 syllables, we stress the first syllable. Let's look at some examples. Pretty. Pretty. You see in the written spelling of that word using graphemes, not phonetic notations. We're using the actual graphemes to spell that word, pretty. We break it down into 2 syllables. Each syllable must contain a vowel sound. Pretty. Pretty. Okay? So we have a 2-syllable word, a 2-syllable adjective, because it is describing something. And it is the first syllable, that's why you see capital letters when we're spelling out the word, indicating that is the word that is taking the that is the word part taking the most stress. Pretty. Pretty. We hear the prit more louder, longer, more higher pitched than the other. And that is the phonetic notation for it. So we see our little line, that little dash before prit, that little vertical line at the top. prit, and E. Pretty. Let's try something else. What about kindness? It's a quality. Kindness. And a quality is a noun. Kindness. Obviously, because I have capital letters in the first syllable, it is the first syllable that is taking the stress. In a two-syllable word that is a noun or an adjective, the first syllable takes the stress. And we will see that little mark, that little vertical line at the beginning, at the top end of kind. Kindness. So what is rule number 2 when we're talking about two-syllable words, words that only have two syllables? If the two-syllable word is a compound noun, the first noun will have more stress than the second. If the two-syllable word is a compound noun, the first noun will have more stress than the second. A reminder, a compound noun is a word with two nouns in it. Each syllable can stand alone as a word. So we might say butterfly. Even though we have three syllables in that word, we have two nouns, butter and fly. Greenhouse has two syllables, but it is a compound noun because it has green and it has house in it, which are words that can stand alone on their own because they're words. Rule number 2 then, the first noun in a compound noun gets stressed. So we'll say butterfly, and we will say greenhouse. So the first noun in a compound noun gets the stress, the primary stress. So let's look at sunset. Sun is a noun, and set, well, it's a verb, but it can also be a noun. And we put those two together, we have sunset, two nouns forming a compound noun. Now, the first noun in a compound noun takes the stress. So sun takes the stress. In the spelling it out, we'll see that those letters are capitalized, S-U-N, and in the phonetic notation using the phonemes rather than the graphemes or letters, we will see that that little vertical line at the top is found before sun, indicating that sun is the primary stress syllable in that word. Greenhouse, greenhouse. What are you hearing? Green. Compound noun, the first noun takes the stress. Greenhouse. And we see the little symbol at the beginning of the green in the phonetic notation. So far we've covered the not so reliable stress rules for two-syllable words. And we dealt with both nouns, adjective, and compound nouns. And we know it is the first syllable in those words that will take the stress. What are the not so reliable rules for three-syllable words? Words that have three syllables, right? Let's find out. So rule number 3 then. And it's the first of the non-reliable stress rules, not so reliable stress rules for three-syllable words, is that stress the first syllable in a three-syllable noun or adjective. Again, dealing with nouns and adjectives, okay? If the three-syllable word is a noun or an adjective, we pronounce the first syllable with greater emphasis and stress. So let's look at some three-syllable words that follow this rule. Let's look at this first one. Pelican. Pelican. Every vowel-containing word part is a syllable, and there's 3 vowel sounds in that word, so we have 3 syllables. Pelican. Now, which one of those is taking the stress according to the spelling of the divided word using graphemes? P-E-L. We know that by the capital letters. Pelican. And in the phonetic notation, which is not the graphemes but the phonemes we're seeing represented, we see the first syllable as taking that stress marked by that little vertical line at the beginning of the syllable, pal. I have it highlighted for this one. Let's look at another one. Let's look at permanent. Permanent. Again, following that rule of 3-syllable words, the first syllable is taking the stress. We know that through the spelling of the divided word by the per being in capital letters. Permanent. Permanent. And we see it in the phonetic notation by that little vertical line at the beginning, in the upper corner, at the beginning of the syllable. Permanent. Permanent. The first syllable takes the stress. Now we're going to move on to the not so reliable stress rules for words with more than 3 syllables, okay? Anywhere from 4 to 8 syllables. So we're looking at those longer words, and they'll often be referred to as longer words, okay? So let's look at the rules. So rule number 4 then is dealing with words with more than 3 syllables, 4 or more syllables. These longer words that end in able, A-B-L-E, will have a primary stress on the first syllable. So if the word has more than 3 syllables and it ends in A-B-L-E, we're going to place the stress on the first syllable. So let's look at some words that follow this rule. Let's look at comfortable. Comfortable. 4 syllables, more than 3, 4. And can you tell by looking at the spelling of this divided word, which syllable is taking the most stress? Right, the first one by all those capital letters in comfortable. Following the rule, the first word of a 4-syllable word takes the most stress if it ends in able. Let's look at the phonetic notation. How can we tell through that? By that little line before the first syllable, that little vertical line at the top. Let's look at another word. Let's look at admirable. Admirable. Again, 4 syllables. Admirable. Which one is taking the stress? Yes, we see AD in capital letters, so that indicates that this is following the rule, and ad is taking the stress. Admirable. There is more, the word is longer, pronounced more fully, higher pitched, it's louder, and it is requiring more movement of the mouth. Admirable. And we can see it in our phonetic notation marked by that little line before the ad. Now I hope I made it clear from the beginning of these rules that they are the not so reliable rules for a reason. Not all words are going to apply in the way that we hoped they would to make it easier for us. English can be complicated because there's just as many rule breakers, unfortunately, as there are rules to follow. So let's look at one of those rule breakers. I'm going to give you the word applicable. Applicable. Why doesn't that apply? We see it broken down, applicable. And it's the first syllable that's taking the stress, but it can also be pronounced applicable. It's secondary, the second syllable can also take the stress. It's not always the first. Both words sounding able, but it can be pronounced in different ways. Applicable or applicable. Now, as you can see from this phonetic notation, we see the second syllable taking the stress. So you can hear it both ways. You can hear the first syllable, applicable, or you can hear applicable, applicable. It depends on how it is pronounced. Okay, that P in the first syllable, by the way, is not pronounced, right? Even though there are 2 P's in the word, we have a silent P. So applicable. Good. So not all our rules will follow the way we would like them to. So far, most of our stress in these multisyllable words has been placed on the first syllable. But we're going to move on to Rule 5. Rule 5 says that in longer words, those with more than 3 syllables, that end in ate, itty, airy, atif, and now, primary stress is placed on the second syllable, okay? So we're going to place stress on second syllable in longer words that end in ate, ate, ity, ary, ative, or nal. So depending on the suffix, we can have our more than 3 syllable words having the stress on the second syllable. So let's look at some of those words that say those words where the second syllable takes the stress. If the word ends in ate, as in communicate, the second syllable takes the stress. If the word ends in ate, the second syllable, if it's more than 3 syllables, takes the stress. Congratulate, congratulate. Watch my mouth as I say these words. Maternity, it ends in ity, maternity, maternity, second syllable taking the stress. Totality, totality, second syllable taking the stress. Obituary, 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 second syllable taking the stress. Judiciary, judiciary, second syllable taking the stress. Affirmative, affirmative, second syllable taking the stress. Demonstrative, demonstrative, second syllable taking the stress. Professional, professional, second syllable taking the stress. Intentional, intentional, second syllable taking the stress. We're ready to move on to Rule 6. If longer words end in tion, sh, or tic, tic, the stress is placed on the second last syllable before the shin or the tic. So the syllable preceding these suffixes will take the stress. Let's move on. So we're going to place the stress on the second last syllable if certain suffixes are being used. That syllable that precedes the suffix. And those syllables are shin and tic. So let's look at federation. Federation. Second last syllable, that syllable that precedes the shin takes the stress. And we can see the little line marking that that's taking the stress in the phonetic notation. Federation. But see, this is the thing that you will find that's different, why our rules are not so reliable. Federation is pronounced differently in the U.S. pronunciation than it is in the British and often the Canadian pronunciation. So federation, federation. And what we see here, that the spelling, that it will take a different approach. So it is still the second last syllable prior to the suffix, but one is a and one is rag. As same goes with population. So we may say population in the States. Second last syllable is still taking the stress. We see it like this. But I tend to say, as a Canadian, and we'll see it as the UK pronunciation, population. Population. So again, it depends on where you break your suffixes up, depending on the dialect that you are hearing or using. But regardless, the second last syllable prior to shin or tic will take the primary stress. We also place the stress on the second last syllable if the word that contains more than 3 syllables ends in tic. So let's look at democratic. Democratic. We see that the second last syllable is taking the stress. And we see that little marking on our phonetic notation as well. Let's look at energetic. 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 It's obvious which one is taking the stress. So if it ends in tion or ic and it's more than 3 syllables, we tend to put the stress on that syllable that precedes that suffix. So far we looked at primary stress and where it's being placed according to how many syllables are in a word. But another thing that comes into play is the use of homographs. And where do we place our stress when it comes to a homograph? A homograph is a word that can be both a verb and a noun. Its meaning can change slightly, and so can its pronunciation, because depending on whether it's a verb or a noun, it will depend on where we place our stress. So we're going to look at that as well when we're dealing with homographs. And this is where Rule 7 will come into play. A homograph, again, is a word that is spelled the same but has different meanings and a slightly different sound because stress is placed on a different syllable. Now, we're talking about words that can either be nouns or verbs. If the homograph is a noun, the first syllable is stressed. And if the homograph is a verb, the second syllable is stressed. So rule number 7 then is to stress the first syllable if a homograph is a noun and the second syllable if it is a verb. So this rule regarding homographs, then, we know that primary stress depends on if the homograph is a noun or a verb. So let's look at some examples. Let's look at the noun delegate. A delegate. He's a delegate for a particular political party. A delegate. Where is this? Where is the primary stress? On the first syllable. But if we were to change that to a verb, as in to delegate, I want to delegate to you these certain tasks. Delegate. The stress goes on to the second syllable. When I refer to something as an object, a noun, an object on the table, then I am using the primary stress on the first syllable. But if I were to say to object, as in a court of law, object, the second syllable becomes the primary stress syllable. So we've covered an awful lot of information on stress and Schwa, well, mostly on primary stress in this PowerPoint presentation. And it's hard to get all that information in. You're not expected to learn it all and know it off by heart. This is a practice sort of presentation where you can learn the words as we go along, learn the rules as we go along, and hopefully with more practice they'll become second nature to you. Let's review what we've learned so far. Best way to review is to test our knowledge and our comprehension. So we'll just go through some questions and see how much is stuck. So let's start with the first question. Each syllable of a multi-syllable English word is pronounced with the same amount of stress. Each syllable of a multi-syllable English word is pronounced with the same amount of stress. Is this A, true, or B, false? I hope you said false. Each syllable of a multi-syllable English word, if it was pronounced with the same amount of stress, would be very monotone. English is a stressed, timed language. So we need those ups and downs and those inflections and intonations. We need certain syllables to be louder, longer, more fully pronounced than other syllables. So the answer to that question is no. Each syllable of a multi-syllable English word is not pronounced with the same amount of stress. Certain syllables will take more stress than others. Let's move on to the next question. Primary stress syllables are louder, longer, and higher pitched, louder, longer, and higher pitched, pronounced more fully, C, require more mouth movement, C, require more mouth movement, or D, all the above, all the above. Primary stress syllables are A, louder, longer, and higher pitched, B, pronounced more fully, C, require more mouth movement, or D, all the above. What is the correct answer? I'm hoping you said D, because primary stressed syllables are louder, longer, and higher pitched than other syllables in a multisyllable word. They are pronounced more fully, and they do require more mouth movement. So the answer to this question is D, all the above. Next question, number 3. Secondary stressed syllables are like the background singers supporting the syllable that is primarily stressed. Secondary stressed syllables are like the background singers supporting the syllable that is primarily stressed. Is that true or is that false? I hope you said B, false, because, A, true, sorry. I hope you said A, true, because they are like the background singers. A secondary stressed syllable is weaker than a primary stressed syllable. It's not as loud or as long, but it supports the primary stress. It allows for that rhythm that English is known for. The answer to this is A, true. So let's go on to the next question. Which syllables of the following notations receive the most stress that are primary? We see the notation for energetic. Energetic. How can we tell? By that little symbol at the upper corner prior to the beginning of the third syllable. So it's the third syllable that takes the stress in energetic. This is photograph. Photograph. Which one is taking the stress? If you said the first syllable, you are absolutely right. Go to that little symbol and see if you can see it. Now, which ones in the above words are secondary? Can you see any secondary syllables in these words? Go to sneeze, energetic. And you'll see that the first syllable in energetic, because the little slash is on the bottom, is the secondary stress syllable. We do not see a secondary stress syllable in photograph. Let's go on. Which syllable is taking the primary stress out of these two words? Number 1. This is education. Education. Can you see where that little mark is? Yes, there's a little mark. Sometimes they're hard to see. Right before the can in education. The third syllable, can. Education. Cation. I should say not can. What about this one? This is an appliance we often use. I'm probably not using enough. Vacuum cleaner. Vacuum cleaner. What is taking the primary stress? Vac. Vac in vacuum cleaner takes the primary stress as noted by that little line at the beginning. Which is taking the secondary stress in these words? Let's go back to education. Do you see a mark? Right. Ed takes the secondary stress. There's a little line before the ed, the first syllable. So the first syllable is secondary stressed. And what about vacuum cleaner? Right. The syllable, the second last syllable in vacuum cleaner, the cl in cleaner, takes the stress marked by that little line at the bottom. Very good. So let's move on to the next question. Using the 7 not so reliable, I want to stress that they're not so reliable, stress rules discussed, determine where the primary stress will go in the following words. Let's look at this word. 2 syllables, ugly, and it is an adjective. So just from that first rule we talked about, if it is a noun or an adjective, two-syllable word, it will be placed on the first syllable. Ugly. Ugly. And we'll see that little symbol in the phonetic notation marking that where the primary stress goes. Sunset. Sunset, 2 syllables, but more than that, it is a compound noun. So what rule do we follow? That's right. The first noun in a compound noun will get stressed. Sunset. And we see that in the phonetic notation. What about this one? Umbrella. It's a 3-syllable word that is a noun. You would think that it would be the first one according to our rule, but I did this one to trick you a little bit. The second syllable takes the stress in umbrella. It's like this. If you look at the dictionary, you'll see the phonetic notation there. I use this one only to show that these are not so reliable stress rules. The rule I gave you was that if it's a noun and it's 3 syllables, the stress usually follows on the first syllable. And that will be true for most cases. But in some cases, as in umbrella, we cannot rely on those rules. They are not as reliable as we would like them to be. And let's move on. Where will the primary stress go in these words? Let's start with this one. Comfortable. Well, you already see the way I have it spelled, so you know it's on the first syllable. 4 more than 3 syllables, and if it ends in able, it will start, the stress will be on the first syllable. Articulate. Articulate. Where do you think it is? Did you say this? Yes. It ends in late. It will be on the second syllable. Articulate. What about this one? Oh, I forgot to. You'll see the spelling there. Calamity. 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 You can watch my mouth. Calamity. Calamity. Just by watching my mouth, you should have gotten that it was the second syllable. Following the rule, ITY, it will be on the second syllable. What about affirmative? Affirmative. Affirmative. Tell by my mouth, right? The second syllable. So what about, let's move on. So number 10. And will the primary stress, where will the primary stress be in these words? Federation. And I didn't even split it up for you. Federation. But we can split it up. Federation. It's on the syllable preceding that suffix. On the second last syllable preceding the suffixation. On the A. Now, I've given you that way, the way we pronounce it in Canada, but you may hear it also the other way as well. And you may hear it on federation, okay, instead of federation, depending on how it's broken up. Democratic, democratic, democratic. Watch my mouth as I say these words and see if you can determine by my mouth movement. Now, the noun, delegate, 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 delegate. It's on the first syllable. To object, 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 on the second syllable. Both delegate and object are homographs. If it's a noun, it will fall on the first syllable. If it is a verb, it will fall on the second syllable. Very good. Wonderful. We've covered our first section on stress and schwa, dealing with primary stress syllables. And we'll continue looking at secondary stress syllables and schwa in the upcoming PowerPoints. But just remember to stress those syllables. There's a reason why those syllables are stressed in English, and it's important that we know where they're stressed. There's a lot of rules to follow, and you're not to remember them by heart. Just know that they're there, and you can always refer back to them if you need to. Just listen and watch your English speakers speaking before you. Watch that movement of the mouth. Listen for that louder, longer, higher pitched, and more fully pronounced syllable that will be in each of the words you're hearing. Thank you again for joining me, and I hope you have an amazing day. And I'll see you again next time. All about the sound.